Are you taking AP Environmental Science? If so, you're in the right place. I am here with Jordan from Apes versus Everybody. Sounds like a primate war, but it's not. AP Environmental Science, guys, I want to show you his Instagram page real quick. This is what you want to follow, Apes versus Everybody. He's got tons of great topical guides and references on here, links to resources that you want right here. So definitely follow him at Apes versus Everybody. Jordan, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking, John. As I was mentioning to you earlier, I'm back in my environment here. I really kind of partial to my space at school. I have a lot of creature comforts and whatnot. And so I did my last one from home, which weirdly didn't feel like home. I feel at home here, especially when it comes to apes. So happy to be here. Happy to kind of have my setup and just, go through some more AP Environmental Science review with folks.
Great. And tonight we're going to be covering Unit 5, which you just told me is land use. What the heck does that mean? What is land use as a headline? What is this unit about? What are you going to be covering specifically today?
Great question. We have this whole big earth here, and
familiar with that one.
What's that?
I said I'm familiar with that. That's a good starting point. I'm with you so far.
Point, right? We have this whole big planet, and we have a lot of land on it. But what the heck do we do with all that land? We do a lot of things with it. And primarily in Unit 5, we learn about how the ways in which we choose to use our land has impacts on the land and the consequences. We want to steer it clear of good or bad. I mean, we use the language, sometimes pros and cons, but it's consequences. Every land use decision has consequences. Today, we're focusing on consequences. What I think is nice is next week, we actually move to solutions. So how can we still use land because we need to use it without having quite as dire of consequences?
That is awesome. That's a great summary. Now, I got a question already, Jordan, in the chat. Sure. Those of you who are joining us live at this event, post your questions in the chat. Jordan and I are going to answer them live for you. If you're watching this video afterwards, definitely leave your comments there. Jordan and I can come in and answer this. We're going to also feature Jordan's channel. Before we do, one of the urgent moral questions of tonight is, when are we going to do our teacher shout outs? So I'm going to start with that as to just kick us off. On our TikTok channel, you can see I posted a few hours ago for some teacher shout outs, and we've got more than 1,000. So I'm going to just shout out a few teachers to get us started. Mrs. Sunset is the best AP Human Geography teacher. Can't even cap. That's amazing, whatever that is.
No cap.
No cap.
A lie.
You
call a fib.
One AP teacher I want to shout out here is Haley Robinson. This is from summer, who shouted out all of her AP teachers, but especially we're shouting out Haley Robinson because tonight is our Apes broadcast. We've got a lot of people for AP World, all these things. So definitely check us out on our TikTok account for all of these wonderful teachers: Daniel Long, Mr. Frazier, Milad Javadifar, if I'm saying that right, Daniel Meehan. And so you can check out these amazing teachers we have on our TikTok account. But I'm going to turn it over to you. Let's get right into Unit 5, land use. And I'll let you share your screen. Let me know if you have any issues, and I'll be in the chat answering questions with everyone.
Yeah, thank you, John. I have actually a teacher shout out as well coming up. So we'll get to that point when we get there, but I have an Apes teacher shout out of my own coming up here. So again, John gave me a really nice introduction there, and just really happy to be doing these collabs with Marco Learning. It's awesome to reach a lot of students taking the Apes exam, try to answer your questions, and ultimately make sure you feel more comfortable taking this exam. So you want to make sure, if you're not already following Marco Learning, that you check out them on all of your social channels. They are going like semi-viral, I might say, on TikTok. I've seen some insane TikToks that they're throwing out there that are just getting totally, they're going crazy. So I have been inspired by John to try to join TikTok. So I have coming soon on my socials page here to TikTok. I have an iPad. I want to get a stand to kind of set those up, but I've been motivated to try it out. So I'll be in that space soon. For now, you can find me on Instagram at Apes Everybody, on the YouTube channel, and I'll be sharing my link tree in a little bit. And my link tree is just going to have all the links you need, and so I can pop those in there. All right, Danielle, Ashley, yeah, you can ask your question if you have it. Happy to help you out. Love to try to answer questions here. And again, just make sure you guys feel more confident going into the exam. So what are we going to cover today? John gave us a nice rundown, but we're going to be covering Unit 5, which is land use. So how do we use the land on Earth? We have a lot of ways that we use it, but we need to know what the consequences are. So we'll be going through first some FRQ writing hacks. How do we earn the most points we can on our FRQs? And, you know, we want to tailor that to the way that we write. We'll go through Unit 5. We'll go through some go-to FRQ answers. So some things that you can have in your back pocket for you to feel, again, just solid, comfortable writing about these land use consequences. Finally, we'll wrap up with how to study. So how should you actually be reviewing content? How should you be trying to memorize it, commit it to memory, integrate it in a way that you understand it, and then some study resources that you can actually use to go through the content. So some exam updates. We're going to go through this very briefly. It's been covered already, but there's 3 administrations. You have to reach out to your school individually. They will tell you what your administration period is. My school, we are writing the 2nd administration. That's going to be Thursday, May 27th at 4 p.m. It's digital, no moving between questions. Check out Marco Learning. They have tons and tons of stuff there on just the whole exam format, everything. So if you're curious, like, what is the exam going to look like? Go to the Marco Learning Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. John has it totally covered. He has just digested that document and broken it down for you guys to know exactly what to expect. What does the APES exam look like? Again, review from our last video, so we'll go very quickly here. 80 multiple choice questions in 90 minutes. That's going to be 60% of the exam. 3 FRQs in 70 minutes. That's going to be 40% of the exam. Now, you may be looking at this and thinking 60% versus 40. The writing's not as important, but the 40%, the writing, you have the biggest control over. So you can change how the writing portion goes more than you can change how the multiple choice portion goes. If you don't know your multiple choice, your content, it's hard to do well in the multiple choice. But if you know your content, you can still do poorly on the FRQ without practice. So that's why it's so critical. So with that being said, let's go forward and look at some FRQ hacks. How can we break this process down? First of all, you want to check out this Write Like a Scholar document that I have. It's a guide for how to annotate FRQs. It's in the community page of my YouTube channel. So if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll find this in the community page. I'll make sure that that's linked into the bottom of this video so you can check it out on the replay, but a really good resource. I physically give this to all my students. So they tape it in their notebook. They look at this each time they write. And it's just, again, super important to have the task verb in mind that you actually want to use when you write an FRQ. You want to tailor your answer specifically to that task verb. So FRQ writing hack number 1. And here's my shout out for an APES teacher. This is from Katie Morris. She's an APES veteran. She's an exam reader. She's someone who is really influential to APES teachers. And what she says is something to the effect of every word in an FRQ matters. The College Board put it in the prompt on purpose. So Katie, if you're watching, sorry that I messed up your quote if I didn't get it perfect, but that's pretty close to what she says. And it's a really helpful reminder for students, read the prompt carefully. You have to read through it thoroughly. And again, in your head, think about, what do I actually need to address in my prompt? If you have the paper in front of you, you're taking the first administration, go ahead and actually underline on the paper, what is it that I need to address? If you're writing it digitally, then try to kind of picture it in your mind's eye. Think like, what does this mean that I have to actually write about? And then another phrase that I like, don't write a great answer to the wrong question. And here's what I mean by that. If you look at this question, letter A down here, identify and describe 2 water-related environmental problems associated with fracking. What you want to do is connect water-related environmental problems to fracking. In other words, how does fracking cause that water-related problem? And that's why I have the little arrows going the opposite ways. That could probably be a TikTok dance right there. Describe, arrows up, I'll work on it. But at any rate, you have to envision on a describe prompt, you are linking or connecting 2 things together. Water-related environmental problem to fracking. How does fracking cause the problem? Hey, Micah, thanks for tuning in. Hey, Kimmy as well. Good to see you guys here in the chat. And then again, you don't want to go off track. This is something I'm constantly telling my students. don't go off track. So what does going off track mean? Well, if you looked at this and you wrote about how fracking decreases aquatic biodiversity, you've wandered off track. You're writing a good answer to a different question, a question about biodiversity instead of about how fracking caused a water-related issue. So be very careful, stay on track. Writing hack number 2. If you're given a map, graph, or figure, you're expected to use it in your answer. This ties back to what Katie Morris, veteran APES teacher, has to say. Every word is in there for a reason. Every piece of data is there for a reason. They expect you to use it, they being your readers in May. So let's take a look at a graph example. When you have a graph with 2 labels on the axes here, we have precipitation and we have temperature. So this is a climatic graph that's going to show what does the climate look like in the African grassland. Be really careful to check your graph-based answers. Check your numbers twice. Let's say the question said, identify the month where you would expect precipitation to be highest in the African grassland. You could, if you looked at this really quickly, glance at precipitation on the left side of this graph, and then look at the blue line and go, oh, it looks like April is the highest month of precipitation. But you would be wrong because you accidentally looked at temperature. You didn't look at the key, you didn't double check your answer. The highest month of precipitation is actually August, according to this climatic graph. And so, especially when you have 2 labels, this is kind of like a pro tip. Don't mix up your labels on your axes. Read them carefully and double check your number. If you had to provide like a trend here and they said, describe the trend in annual precipitation from August through October, you would want to give actual numbers. You know, we're going from somewhere in the ballpark of 375 millimeters in August down to, it looks like somewhere between 50 and 100, so 80 in October. Double check those numbers before you actually write them down, because these points are too easy to miss. What I mean by that is if you spend 10 extra seconds double checking a graphing answer, you could earn a point that you miss due to rushing. It's really hard though to earn an FRQ point in 10 seconds on a describe. And so the benefit you gain by checking your mathematical answers closely is really huge in terms of how much time it takes. And I know the last thing you want to do when you're writing an FRQ is check, your answers. Like, you're ready to go. And I do this with my students all the time. There's Alex in the chat. Hey, Alex. It's frustrating to have to check your answers. You want to hit submit. You want to be done. You want to just forget what you wrote and leave the 3 hours of the exam in the past. But at the end of that, 2.5 hours or 3 hours, try to dig deep and go, you know what? I'm going to review my math-based answers or my numerical answers, because just a slight review could earn me a whole point that I was about to miss. So it's hard to do that, but you want to commit to it. Hey, another thing, watch out for stacked bar graphs. There were some stacked bar graphs on last year's FRQs. Whew, those ones really threw some students for a loop. So when you have a stacked bar graph, really important to look at the pattern or shading or color. Now, because your AP exams are not in color, they're typically going to be shaded or hatched or given some kind of pattern. So if this question was identify the age group most likely to treat water by boiling it in a pot, we need to look very closely at the graph. We can see in the red, rectangle here, okay, boiling in a pot is this middle shade of gray. So which age group now has the biggest rate of boiling water in a pot to treat it? And then we would notice, okay, it's this far right bar, and now we're going to go down to 65 to 85, and that's our answer. So this is a fairly easy example, but be really careful here when you look at stacked bar graphs that you look at the actual relative size of the bar, not just how high or how low it goes. So that's another big Achilles heel of APE students, is misreading stacked bar graphs. Okay, another big Achilles heel here. And what I'm going through on these writing hacks are how to make sure you don't cost yourself easy points. What I mean is there are a lot of points on FRQs that you can earn just by careful map reading and graph reading. Here's a great example. On the FRQs from last year, I graded FRQs last year, and many students missed points because they're writing about the left side of the map or the right side of the map. And we can't write about the left side or the right side of a map because, you know, I can't give you directions to get somewhere by saying, you know, go left from Michigan, because that's just not how we describe maps, right? So we have to use cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. That might sound obvious, but it's not obvious to every student. I have seen students describe at the top of the map, at the top border even. The top border is kind of risky. Northernmost border is a lot more precise. So here's an example. And another pro tip is try to use 2 directional descriptors. So what I mean by that is, instead of saying that sulfate ion deposition or, you know, acid rain is highest in the eastern US, you might be able to get away with that. But it's a lot safer to give 2 descriptors. So the Midwest, so there we've hit 2 descriptors, the Midwest or the Northeast. Now we've given 2 descriptors. Another thing you could say is slightly south of the Great Lakes region. Even if you give a region and then a direction, you may be able to earn a point. Whereas if you just say the north, the south, the east, that's riskier. You are potentially leaving a point on the board. So always try to use 2 descriptors on a map-based question. Okay, now let's talk about describing trends. This is another type of FRQ that is very likely to show up in the future, and you want to make sure that you're very precise here. So what you have to do is look at this graph and be very precise and actually use the numbers. So again, when you're given a graph, you're expected to use the data to reference specific numbers, especially in a trend. One of the #1 mistakes students make is when they're describing a trend, they just say that, you know, from 2005 to 2015, the blood lead level goes down. Well, of course it goes down, but typically on scoring guides, you're expected to go a little bit deeper than that, to actually give some numbers or to break the trend into 2 pieces. It goes down sharply for X amount of time, and it goes down more gradually for Y amount of time. So a great example here, and it seems like a little overkill, but it really would be helpful to ensure that you're in this point. The question is, describe the trend in children younger than 6 with blood lead levels over 5 micrograms per deciliter from 2005 to 2015. So here's what I want to point out. I want to actually draw on the screen really quickly here, if I can, and kind of emphasize how this works. So if we look here at the portion that I'm going to outline in red, the portion I'm outlining in red is dropping far faster than the portion in blue. So from 2005 to 2009, we're declining all the way from 120.4 to 62.3. So from here, like, this is a very, very rapid decline. And so that's a different type of decline than if we switch here to blue, or we'll do yellow for yield or slow down. It's going to be a much more gradual decline through 2015. So if we break our trend in 2 pieces like that, we're being much more precise and we're giving an answer that has a much better chance of earning a point. Again, if you just say from 2005 to 2015, the blood lead level goes down, you're not wrong, but you're not being very precise. You're not really showing the College Board that you have learned how to accurately read graphs and draw trends from them. And so again, a great way to do this would be able to break it in half and say from 2005 to 2009, it declines sharply, and give the actual numbers. And then from 2009 to 2015, it declines far more gradually, give those numbers as well. Always helps you out to actually give numbers, and it always helps you out to be a little bit more precise with the different sections of the graph you're talking about. So those, again, just really important tips to consider when you are reading data. The third tip I have before we take a quick break here and just talk a little bit about what's coming next is to visualize your answer. So I have the brain emoji and the eye emoji. Kind of visualize in your mind's eye, as we say. And what that means is trying to actually picture in your head, what do you need to do? So when you identify something, I want you to picture the magnifying glass. You're holding up a magnifying glass and you're scanning really carefully, what do I need to actually identify? If you have a physical piece of paper, you underline that. If you are reading it, then you're thinking in your head, what am I trying to visualize as I am going to identify this? Like, what do I actually need to identify? Because you don't need to elaborate, you have a little bit of extra time on identify. So double check that you're identifying the correct thing. Then when we go on to describe, we have the 2 arrows going either way, because again, you need to link 2 things. You need to, I'm just noticing here, I have drawings on the screen. Clear those out. I was like, I don't remember that part of my slide. All right, there we go. So when you describe, you're linking 2 things together. And so what is your basic answer? And then what are the additional details you're supporting it with? So what are you connecting your answer to? We have an example in a second. And then for explain, what process are you detailing? So we have step by step, we have someone taking, steps here, and we have the link emoji, one of my favorite emojis. And what steps are connecting to each other? So when you explain something, step A leads to step B, leads to step C, or cause A leads to effect B. So it's a little bit deeper. You're not going to get away with surface level details. You need to really give, step by step, connect ideas together. So what does this practically look like in an FRQ? So we have, again, this FRQ from the beginning of, this video where we're focusing on making sure that we are actually linking the correct things. So in this case, identify and describe 2 water-related environmental problems associated with fracking. So we want to actually visualize our answer. We want to think the 2 arrows. What are we linking? And notice that on the scoring guide, they set it up just like this. They set up a table. And so you want to link identification of the problem, groundwater contamination, to how fracking causes it. So notice if we read through these descriptions, fracking liquids or chemicals can contaminate drinking or groundwater. Liquid waste stored in lagoons can leach into groundwater. So we're not describing biological effects. We're not describing human health impacts. We're not talking about how it's going to cost the economy money to clean up. We're talking specifically about a water-related environmental problem and how it's associated with fracking. So again, I keep doing this kind of visualization here because if you can start to visualize in your brain, in your mind, what does the scoring guide for this FRQ look like? What do I need to do? What 2 things am I connecting? You're going to write a lot stronger answers. And so I can't say enough about trying to visualize your answer and think, what do I need to do for this prompt style? One more time for identify, picture getting out that magnifying glass and kind of searching for the clues, because once you find the answer, if you know it, it's very easy to earn the point. You just need to be precise, just identify one simple sentence, but you need to identify the correct thing. You need to double check to ensure that you've identified something that fits with the prompt. Describe, link 2 things together. How is your basic answer linked to the additional detail? And then explain step by step or linking cause and effect. So that leads us to a question/brain break here. That was a lot of FRQ tips. I would love for people to ask FRQ-based questions if they have them, if they're wondering, what's your approach to this type of question? Or, how can I make sure that I stop missing describe points? Those would be great questions to ask. And if you don't have any questions, we can always use a brain break. And so here is a meme to take a look at for a second, and it's a segue into land use. So I'll talk about it here in a second while we wait to see if people have questions, or just give you a second to catch up.
Yeah, and Jordan, I just wanted to hop in. This is amazing. I'm learning so much, especially from this meme. So we had a couple of questions and comments. I've posted everyone a link to Jordan's YouTube page. If you go to the community channel, he posts a lot of great links there. Another thing I'm going to do real quick, everyone, I'm going to share my screen. And I found a way, because I'm stupid and didn't realize this before, we were shouting out all these amazing teachers. There's a much easier way to do this, to find all of our APES teachers. So I want to do a quick shout out to America's AP Environmental Science teachers, Bregberg, the Mrs. Goebel, who teaches AP Environmental Science, Mr. Small. AP Environmental Science is one of the smaller sciences overall as a subject, but we've got a lot of students of these out here shouting out Mrs. Riley, Mr. Brinker, Mrs. Seckinger, Miss Ham, Sean Platt, and Mr. Forsberg, Mr. Jim McMahon, Mr. Fall, and Mrs. Riley's got some people. This looks like several different students who are fans of these teachers. And again, that's on our TikTok account at Marco Learning. I encourage you to follow us there. Post your questions and comments there on that, and as well in this video. And if you like this video, press that like button. Be sure to subscribe to our channel, and we'll be going live in a lot of AP subjects through the month, and we'll be posting those recordings here. So Colin's asking, will this stream be saved in your YouTube channel? Yeah, it'll be here shortly after it's over, and you can watch it, share it, enjoy it. And then we've got this really great question that came up. I think it was inspired, Jordan, by the meme from AG. So I'll let you respond to that, and you can share your screen again, and I'll be hanging out here in the chat with everyone.
Awesome. Thanks for popping in, John. Yes, AG. Speaking of shout outs, AG deserves a shout out. I don't know your real name, AG, but you have been like very dedicated to live streams, to, you know, Marco reviews. I feel like I've seen you on the YouTube channel. So students deserve shout outs too. So shout out to AG. Not one of my students, but someone who's very dedicated to apes, I can tell. So great question. Let's go back to that question. What's the difference between identify and describe? So first, what I want to do is start here, because sometimes you can actually earn a point for identify and a separate point for describe. Now that's less common. That was typically done on FRQs prior to 2018. The new FRQs from 2020, that has not been the case as much. Typically they are more isolated. So it's like clearly identify or clearly describe, or if it's identify and describe, it's more like 1 point. Unfortunately, they're taking away that double point option a little bit. But let's go back to, well, first of all, let's just take a look here. On these FRQs in the past, simply saying fracking can cause groundwater contamination, that would be a point on this FRQ in 2012. Fracking causes surface water contamination. That's a point in 2012. Description point comes from fracking causes groundwater contamination because the waste that gets stored on site in lagoons, so like the used fracking fluid, can leach into groundwater, you know, leach into aquifers, contaminate them. And then if you really want to take your describe answer to the next level, you could list something that's in fracking fluid. So I always like to tell my students, if you can name a specific pollutant, you have elevated your answer by a lot. And so I'm going to be doing a lot of review for Marco Learning this month, every Wednesday at 7. And I'm going to really start getting into specific pollutants that you want to reference to take those descriptions to the next level. But again, to answer your original question, back to identify versus describe, if we hop to this slide here, and this is in the community page of my YouTube channel. It's not actually in my link tree that I'm going to share later, but I'll add it in there. You can see identify, 1 sentence max. Simple answer, no elaboration, just clearly say it. You should still be precise, and you should still write a full sentence. But you don't need a why or a because. In a describe, 2 sentences is a good benchmark. It doesn't have to be 2 sentences. It can certainly be 1 compound, kind of meaty sentence, I'll say sometimes, and it's basic key details. So you are providing some level of depth beyond the identify, and you hit the nail on the head, AG. You need to connect it to the prompt. So how does the description that you're giving of your basic identify, how does that connect to the prompt? Description is kind of like identify and how do you know that? Connect it to the prompt. So that's a great way to think through it. So what we'll do is flip ahead now to some content review. So first topic in Unit 5 I want to talk about is clear cutting. Now, humans do clear cutting for a variety of reasons, and it's a good skill to be able to cite those reasons. So we might clear cut for agriculture. We might clear cut for urbanization. We might clear cut, you know, because we're going to build a dam or because we're going to be doing some mining. And so just a multitude of reasons that people would clear cut. But we need to know what happens because of that. When we clear cut, the impacts on a forest are that the trees are largely gone. So the forest essentially is not there. We've lost a habitat. Also, the loss of root structure loosens soil. Now, the reason I put loss of root structure in bold here, and I have the writing like a scholar emoji over on the right side of the screen, is that this is critical language. I have graded FRQs for the College Board, and there are some phrases that are really critical to be able to use. And this is just a great example of how you can elevate yourself and put yourself in a better position to earn a point. Instead of saying cutting down trees can make soil erode, saying that roots stabilize and anchor soil, preventing erosion is big. You've now taken yourself to the next level. So anytime I have this writing and the graduation cap emoji, that stands for write like a scholar. And it's just a way that we can elevate our writing to the next level. So now we're going to go through some more must-know APES concepts. A big mistake I see my students making is saying that trees filter out air pollution like CO2. And the problem is carbon dioxide is not an air pollutant from a standpoint of human health. So you want to be very careful here and know that carbon sequestration or storage is different than filtering of the air. So trees sequester or store CO2 through the atmosphere, store it as biomass. They filter air pollutants by taking them into their stomata. Different things. And this is nice because they could actually be two different benefits on an FRQ. Again, CO2 sequestration, storage, that's different than filtering the air of SO2, NOx, particulate matter, taking those pollutants in through their stomata. Different things, important to understand. Here we go, impacts of agriculture. We're going to skip right to go to FRQ answers and review content kind of while we look at those FRQ answers. So if you want to go to slam dunk on no questions asked, surefire answer. You still have to do the work of describing it, but you can bet that soil erosion is usually going to be one of the impacts of agriculture. So how does soil erosion occur? What leads to it? A monocropping, so planting only one crop as far as the eye can see. Then you harvest that crop at the same time, and the soil is now bare without any roots to stabilize it because you don't have other crops that you're harvesting at different times. Tilling as well. You could till the soil, break it up. Mechanically, it's going to loosen the soil. Now it's going to be more prone to being blown away by the wind and the rain, and we can see that in this picture on the screen. If you over irrigate, so if you water your crops too much, there is such a thing as overwatering, as too much water. One, it can waste water, it can drown your roots, but from the standpoint of soil erosion, the extra water flows off your fields and you've now lost some of your precious topsoil that has nutrients. Really detrimental to overwater. Then we have overgrazing. So if you have livestock eating the grass in a pasture or an area, they can eat the grass down so low that the roots die. Now that soil is more prone to erosion. So pro tip here, go to FRQ answer is soil erosion. And then all of these different ways are, strategies that you can get to that answer. So if you can describe monocropping, tilling, over irrigation, those can all get you to this soil erosion go-to point. Let's talk about another go-to FRQ answer, greenhouse gas emissions. This is a go-to FRQ answer like for the whole class, for everything, but especially for agriculture. And we have 5 different ways we can get to greenhouse gas emissions and climate change here. So fertilizers, we have to invest fossil fuels. We have to burn them to actually create the fertilizer. So that's going to emit CO2. Machines, so using tractors to harvest or to plow the fields, that's going to burn gasoline, emit CO2. Agriculture soils themselves, so they're going to actually release nitrous oxide. That's due to denitrifying bacteria that break down excess nitrates in the synthetic fertilizers. So there you have fertilizer contributing in numerous ways to greenhouse gas emissions. Deforestation, one of the most overlooked and poorly understood ways that agriculture and land use contributes to greenhouse gas emissions is through deforestation. And that's because it doesn't necessarily emit a lot of extra CO2. The trees might decompose and release some CO2 and some methane, but it's the loss of the future CO2 sequestration. Yeah. And so you want to make sure that you are writing like a scholar here. Exactly. All of these go-to FRQ answers are examples, Rebecca, of how to write like a scholar. Elevate your language usage, be specific, and be able to explain how something happens. Livestock, again, we're going to touch on this in a minute, but when we have livestock that we raise to produce meat, their burps and their farts actually produce CH4, methane, and some carbon dioxide as well. So greenhouse gas emissions come from a number of different ways here. Yeah, great question. I'm going to pause for a second because Rebecca is asking a question about how to write like a scholar. The writing like a scholar really tells you how to answer an FRQ based on what I call the task verbs. So a task verb is identify, describe, explain. And the nice thing is that the College Board has been very clear about which task verbs they'll use. And they are only in the future, knock on wood, unless they redesign the course, they're only using the task verbs that are on that sheet. So if you look at that sheet and let me just pull it up here, you can basically be sure, well, it's in this presentation, you can basically be sure that you are going to be prepared from a language standpoint of what you need to do. So every question should have describe, explain, calculate, identify, justify, propose a solution, or make a claim. Now, in my video next week, same time, same place, Marco Learning, 7 p.m. here, we're going to get focused more on propose a solution and make a claim. Because today we're going through the problems or the environmental consequences of agriculture. Next week, we're going through the solutions to those consequences of agriculture, land use, all of those things. So yes, absolutely. These are the task verbs, key words. Great question, Una. On GHG emissions, I would say yes, that is an acceptable abbreviation, especially if you name one. Greenhouse gas emissions is good, but it's even better if you could say CO2, methane, fluorofluorocarbons, and we'll go through an exhaustive list of those GHGs that you should know. Will you be able to access these slides? That's a great question. I'll have to talk to John to see if we can actually just link this into the video. I would think so, but this video will also have a replay. So you're more than welcome to go back and review through this. And what I can do is pull specific slides that are helpful and compile them into another FRQ writing resource. What I'll also do in a minute is show you my link tree, which has all of the links that I currently have shared out, but I'm happy to put more links in the link tree. The more branches on the tree, the bigger it is and the more resources we have. Yeah, the live will be posted on YouTube as well, the replay. There you go. Okay, so we are going to speed up a little bit and we're going to touch on just the impacts of agriculture from a biodiversity standpoint. Agriculture has impacts on biodiversity in 4 different ways. Well, more than 4, but 4 FRQ style ways. Pesticide use, so applying pesticides to agricultural fields, those pesticides can run off into bodies of water, killing sensitive species and lowering biodiversity. And so that's going to lower species biodiversity. One thing I want you guys to notice here is that I'm bolding in each instance which type of biodiversity is decreasing: species, genetic, ecosystem, and that's a really big writing tip. Then you have GMOs, HYVs, high yield varieties. That just means plants that are all essentially the same the same species, same genetics. They're not quite GMOs, but they've been bred to have all the same characteristics. And then monocropping. When you do that, you reduce both genetic diversity and species diversity, and that makes your crops more vulnerable to disease. So there's a lot of issues with biodiversity when it comes to what crops we actually put in the ground. You have deforestation again. So when we clear land for agricultural fields, that's going to remove a lot of habitat and food sources. It's going to drive down ecosystem and species diversity. And we have fertilizer use. So fertilizers that are over applied to agricultural soils run off with our precipitation. That's going to go into bodies of water. Now we have eutrophication, algae bloom on the surface, and we get less oxygen in the water, hypoxia, hypo for low, ox for oxygen, and then we have a lot of species that can't survive, and so biodiversity has declined further. So again, notice these big major course themes: biodiversity loss, greenhouse gas emissions, soil erosion. We can connect these to land use, especially through agriculture. So what we're going to do here is skip forward because these slides will be available on the future, and we're going to take one last kind of brain break link tree here so that you guys can check out all of the resources that I have listed currently. So if you guys open this up, what you're going to see is the link tree that I have there. You might have to copy and paste that URL, but that's going to take you to slides. It's going to take you to the Instagram. It's going to take you to some review guides. And because people have seemed interested in it, I think it would be helpful for me to include there as well the FRQ writing guide that I just mentioned. So I'll make sure that gets in there as well.
Amazing. And in fact, Jordan, if you share with me that link here in the chat, I can post it into the chat on YouTube, and we'll put it in the description. So I really want to thank you all for coming this evening and for sharing all your questions. Jordan, tell me, what more are we almost wrapping up here, or what do we have other topics that we wanted to cover?
Yeah, those are the topics for sure. The big ideas, again, writing like a scholar, elevating your vocab, going to those go-to FRQ answers that you're comfortable with. Check out that link tree. It has a lot of resources. I just sent it to John. I also pasted it into the YouTube chat, but I don't think it it didn't actually turn into a link. That must be a special Magic Marco privilege. But there it is now.
Okay. Yeah, and I think I've got that in now. So that is in, and I've just added it to the description of this video. So that's here. I also want to encourage you all, if you have not yet, definitely go to Jordan's channel and subscribe there. That is the place to be for all things related to apes, environmental science, not primates, and really great resources that he's got on his page. I'm going to post that one more time here. Jordan, any other, as we wrap up, any other final tips for people dealing with the question of the paper and pencil versus digital exams? That's a whole can of worms to kind of close with, but what are some of the headline things for people to consider on the AP Environmental Science exam?
That's a great question. So there's a lot of benefit to physically marking up your FRQ. You can circle the task verb. You can underline what it is you actually have to identify, describe, discuss. That's half the battle. And so I think there's some value there. I think the flip side of that is that many students are far faster typers. And I have students who have said, I'm going to get through more answers. I'm going to write more. Writing more isn't always better. You always want to write like a scholar, and scholars don't always, write a whole dissertation on one question. Sometimes one sentence or two sentences get you there. But I have students for sure who have said that just being able to type is going to make me more comfortable and able to, get my ideas down quicker. So I think there's pros and cons to each. I would say that if you're doing it digitally, you can still utilize some of the annotating practices by highlighting. Like, you should be able to put your cursor on the screen. I don't actually know the answer to that question, so I should be careful before I give that as a piece of advice. I assume you can see your cursor on the screen. So you can at least hover your cursor underneath, like, kind of what I would call the crux of the question. And that's, what am I identifying? What am I describing? And so that's actually a skill I would think about, along with just physically, following your finger along where you're reading and kind of, like, that is where I have to actually identify something. So be careful, use your mouse, especially to track, if you're digital, where a certain point is on a graph. Double check it. Obviously, you can't draw the lines like you might on a paper test. So if you're online, double checking graphs and numerical answers is especially important. Those would be kind of my initial thoughts and pieces of advice on the digital versus the paper.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really great place to end. Remember, everyone, we have a video on the digital versus paper exams, or on the breakdown of this year's exams, with an article on our channel. We have that in the description. So definitely be in touch with us. Thank you so much, Jordan. We will be here same time next week, Wednesday, March 17th, 7 p.m. If you've been watching the recording of this, post your questions in the comments. Jordan and I will answer. Have a great night.
That's right. I'll make sure to come back and check. So if you have questions,